Um, let me start by congratulating you, Susan, and David on your election yesterday. And I also want to congratulate all other officers for their to be elected on the executive board. Colleagues, friends, sisters and brothers, launching a book on democracy in Thailand, a country where they have not yet come to grips with the concept of representative democracy and the rule of law, can be a risky enterprise. That occurred to me this morning on the rabbit train when a passenger told me about the crackdown on democracy, on the democracy movement here in Bangkok a couple of days ago, and the influence of the military on the political process. And it made me recall my first experience as a young delegate to a World Congress of the International Federation of Free Teachers Unions. It was in 1977 in Manila, at the time that Ferdinand Marcos ruled the Philippines. And Marcos himself had opened the Congress, praising the teaching profession and announcing a 5% pay increase as a reward for running the voting stations and counting the votes and helping him win the previous election. Not that it mattered, because most of his opponents were in jail. As a young and innocent teacher, responding to the progress report of the General Secretary, I expressed my surprise at the selection of the venue and proposed that we should put together a delegation to visit a few of those political prisoners. And Mr. Marcos, who was sitting right in the front row, was not amused by that suggestion and marched out of the convention hall. The Congress was then kindly invited to break up and to go home, while I was declared persona non grata and had to seek refuge in the Dutch embassy, where I got an earful from the ambassador. Now, I will spare you the rest of that story, just to say that a couple of years later, the Philippines ousted the Marcos family, restored democracy, until a couple of years ago, Mr. Duterte came in power through free elections, but with the increasing repression, killings, and intimidation, we all must wonder whether history is about to repeat itself. I do not expect our book to get that kind of reaction. I don't see any head of state restlessly turning in his chair. So let's proceed with the launch of our book, 25 Lessons from the Teaching Profession on Education and Democracy. Colleagues, last year we celebrated Education International's 25th anniversary. In 1993, 4 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we thought that democracy was secured and secure. Democracy, human and trade union rights seemed within reach for everybody. And it was that optimism that helped all of us to come together in the Education International. But things did not go exactly the way that we had hoped. For many of my generation, it sometimes feels like walking on the boulevard of broken dreams. Since the election of Mr. Trump in 2016, our colleagues, our American colleagues, speak of democracy being in crisis in their country. But as we know, Trump's erratic behavior has had an impact on democratic developments worldwide and even enforced authoritarian rule in too many places. He has also shaken the international order that we have known in the past 70 years. Not long ago, the Washington Post changed its motto to "Democracy dies in darkness." A warning, colleagues, not only to the American people, but to us all. A couple of weeks after Mr. Trump's inauguration in March of 2017, I had a very interesting conversation with the head of one of the UN agencies. That person confided that the situation within the United Nations system was politically rudderless. I asked her, should we start getting worried when you as world leaders are not sure which steps to take? The person pointed at me and said that the solution ultimately had to be found in what and how we teach our children, and that therefore the teaching profession and its representative organization, that is us, Education International, and you, our members, and your members around the world, were key. The idea of our book on education and democracy, 25 Lessons from the Teaching Profession, was born. Susan Hopgood and I thought that on the occasion of our 25th anniversary, we should remind ourselves of the significant role we must play in promoting and protecting democracy, and to recall the most important lessons we have learned throughout the history of our movement, and in particular during the past 25 years. Susan and I would like to thank Jim Baker, Felisa Tibbets, and Jelmer Evers, our co-writers, for contributing facts and ideas from their expertise and experience. Thank you. Colleagues, the lessons are first and foremost meant to support classroom teachers, your members, fighting their daily battles, confronting education authorities, governments, and engaging with the community. We appeal to their professional ideals, to their ambition to make a difference for their students and the societies in which they grow up. And we want to remind them that the values underpinning democracy, social justice, and human rights travel through our classrooms. Democracy has to be born anew every generation, and education is its midwife. That's what John Dewey wrote more than 100 years ago. And we thought it was high time to dust off Dewey's legacy and those of other philosophers like John Amos Comenius and Paulo Freire, all great inspirers of the teaching profession worldwide. Lesson number 3, do not be the obedient servant of the state, is my favorite lesson. It must be the streak of anarchism that must have resurfaced after my retirement, but it is also my distrust of government, democratically elected or not, and my distrust of power in general, whether exerted over citizens or workers or consumers that should always, I think, be somewhere in the back of our professional and trade union consciences. In the book, we give examples of breathtaking courage shown by educators and education unions standing up against the powers that be. Like in Poland and Norway during the Second World War, when teachers defied Adolf Hitler and refused to accept Nazification of their school systems. Or today, like in Turkey, in Iran, in Bahrain, in Djibouti, in the Philippines, and in Brazil, where colleagues reject the transformation of their schools into transmission belts of state or party ideology or religion. They refuse to teach lies. They refuse to let down their students. And they refuse to betray their profession. They're on the front lines. Many are here today. Let's salute them. Colleagues, in places where authoritarian rulers try to get a grip on the teaching and academic professions, on what is being taught in schools and universities, where the rule of law does not exist or is only on paper, we know our assignment is difficult, but relatively uncomplicated. Organize, mobilize, and resist. But in the so-called established and emerging democracies, where most of us in this room work and live, and where we take free elections for granted, democratic standards may fade away, sometimes without us realizing it. That is, until we wake up one morning, finding our professional and trade union freedoms extinguished, finding our public services pared to the bone and sold to the market, finding our media concentrated in the hands of a few tycoons, and yes, finding our politicians shamelessly exploiting racist and xenophobic sentiments. What I'm saying is that democracy is a process that is reversible. What I'm saying is that democracy can easily slip away. I'm perplexed as to why education has so rarely come into the public debate about the future of democracy. Perhaps many do not see the intimate link between our profession, our unions, and the way our societies are governed. Or it may be because we live in a short-term world with short attention spans, and some find it difficult to address a future beyond the next election or beyond the next standardized test. But in collecting material for our 25 lessons, we have come across many classroom teachers, academics, and education support staff around the world making incredible and tremendous efforts to introduce their students to the democratic institutions in their country, to help them discover democratic and human rights values, to teach them responsible use of the social media, to exercise critical thinking, and yes, also to support student initiatives to bring about change in their communities. The youth mobilization on climate change, on gun control, and on other issues shows that many young people are not prepared to give up on the process of democracy and are able to act collectively. To achieve the rights of the 100 million most marginalized children, the campaign Kailash has talked about yesterday, I think that's another example of young people and the education community they are or should be part of, utilizing the right of free expression, freedom of association, the right to demonstrate, and the right to hold their politicians accountable. But, colleagues, no good deed goes unpunished. The new authoritarians have started their attacks on the teaching profession. And some now even want to enter our classrooms and tell us what to teach and what not to teach. The I word has made a comeback. Indoctrination. Educating for democracy. Shaping global citizens. And stimulating critical thinking. They say it's all indoctrination. You don't need to be reminded of the fact that we teach reason, rationality, and values, democratic and human rights values, and not dogma and doctrine. David mentioned yesterday President Bolsonaro of Brazil, who accuses educators of teaching Marxist ideology in schools. And he has asked students to videotape their teachers and shame them on social media. David also mentioned Turkey, where President Erdogan, after the failed military coup in 2016, fired thousands of teachers, accusing them of being disloyal to his government. Let me add Viktor Orban of Hungary to this list, who has taken control of school textbooks, which are now increasingly showing a narrow nationalistic view. And last year, he forced a Central European university to close its doors. In Italy, Matteo Salvini, the country's far-right leader, wanted to ban a university textbook in political science that brands his party as extreme right. And only last May, a teacher from Palermo was suspended for 2 weeks with half pay after her students had compiled a video in which the kids had compared Salvini's migration laws with the racial laws promulgated by the Italian dictator Mussolini in 1938. In Germany, in the Netherlands, right-wing populist parties have established internet platforms where students are invited to report left-wing indoctrination by their teachers. Even teaching climate change has been labeled by them as indoctrination. And last February, at a campaign rally in Texas, the son of the President of the United States, Donald Trump Jr., encouraged his young audience to, and I quote, "Keep up that fight, bring it to your schools. You don't have to be indoctrinated by these loser teachers that are trying to sell you socialism from birth. You don't have to do it," he said. Colleagues, we do not tolerate bullies inside our classrooms. So why would we stand for being pushed around by elected bullies from the outside? Let there be no misunderstanding. Educating for democracy requires academic freedom and professional autonomy. And where that autonomy is denied, we need to either simply take it or take it back. We must make it perfectly clear that we will use our professional discretion to interrogate and to reject curricula that defy facts, that falsify history, or that lead to xenophobia and hate. There is a professional and ethical responsibility that outweighs the authority of politicians, of education employers, or even of governments where they have abdicated democracy and human rights. I think that the global guidelines for professional standards that you will be discussing, I think tomorrow, will be a new valuable tool to help us to do exactly that. Colleagues, promoting and protecting democracy is complementary to the rest of our agenda, which is also about democracy. Sure, democracy is about free elections, but it is about a lot more. It is the very basis of everything we want to achieve. It is about the way we live and inhabit our planet. It's about teaching and learning. It's about meeting human needs and enhancing justice and human dignity. It's about vision, it's about progress, it's about hope. Our book is not an EI policy document. It is not proposed for adoption by Congress. It is rather a distillation, a summary of shared global experiences that we believe can help us forward and make a difference. We are not reinventing the wheel. With every single lesson, whether addressing professional issues or trade union challenges, you find yourself on very familiar ground. Neither do we pretend to deliver the final answer. In fact, if I could add a lesson 26, it would be there is no one-size-fits-all. Every lesson will require further discussion at home, within our unions, within our schools and universities, wherever we develop the trade union strategies and educational routes that best fit our national and local circumstances. All of this to say that this book will not just be a souvenir from Bangkok. It is intended to stimulate discussion and action. So we encourage you to make the book available to your members. Last Saturday, I told the Further and Higher Education Caucus that you could view these 25 lessons as 25 theses to be nailed to every school door and education ministry's door, like Luther did in 1517 when he nailed his thesis to the door of the All Saints Church in Wittenberg, but perhaps this analogy could get me into trouble. Later this week, you will receive a printed English language version. I hope that will be tomorrow. And we have, as Susan already told you, prepared ebook versions in English, French, and Spanish, open access, of course, that can be easily and inexpensively find their way to your members. Feel free to add your logo and a national introduction or other contents. Some member unions will translate the 25 lessons into local languages. ZNP will soon publish a Polish version, and I encourage all of you to follow that example. Ultimately, our progress is supporting democracy, which means including through the deployment of this book, and it will depend on whether democracy becomes part of the person-to-person communication that takes place every day in our classrooms and in our trade unions. And I can really think of nobody more capable of doing that than the people who we are so privileged to represent. Finally, colleagues, I had that privilege for the past 25 years. And I take this opportunity to thank all of you, all the member organizations of Education International, for their confidence, or at least for having tolerated me for all those years. It was a great honor serving you, and I'm proud that yesterday you have passed on the torch to David Edwards, who has the passion and the talent to lead us into the next chapter of our future. So I say farewell, sisters and brothers. Like they say in my hometown, keep the loins girded and the lamps burning. Solidarity forever.